what we, I think, as a community often miss in raising our children and having this hyper focus on academics. We're missing something really integral to their success.
Yeah.
Getting into college is just the beginning of the story, right? That's not the end of the journey.
I did not get in to the college I wanted to go to. And that was like heartbreaking.
It's devastating.
It's devastating. And because of that, like, my life is so beautiful. But you can't see that. Life is, according to you, falling apart. You're like, I have no way out of this now.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've seen, especially with South Asians, the lack of personal awareness of what is possible in today's world.
I am so excited because as overachievers, I love when we have guests that have overachieved us. Like I'm so excited for who we have in store today.
Yeah. And our guest today is someone that really can be a big help to both you and I and a lot of our listeners, because we have kids, and if we follow what our parents said or what our grandparents are thinking about our kids' futures, they should go to college. And we have none other than an expert on all things college admissions, right? Dr. Sheila AkBar, Sheila with an EI. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Dinesh. I cringe when you say I've overachieved you. I've seen also the list of guests that you've had on previously. I barely stack up.
Okay, so you and Multi-B, not one, but 2 PhDs, because one just wasn't enough. Like
it wasn't enough. Yeah.
What
I
were
can
your
tell you the
PhDs
story
in?
behind that. I wasn't trying to overachieve. I was trying to make sure I could get a job in the academic job market, which is really tough.
Overachiever.
Yeah.
What were your PhDs in?
I have one in Near Eastern languages and civilizations. So that was really a focus on Arabic and Persian literature.
Yeah.
And then the second is in comparative literature, where I added in French, Italian, English, and Spanish.
Oh, wow.
Literature. Yeah.
You speak multiple languages?
I speak about 7.
About 7. So
About
like 6.9, 7.2?
Something like that. Yeah. I mean, I'm a typical academic. Like, I could read almost anything you put in front of me and translate it. But if you ask me to speak and ask like for some basic directions in Spain, I'd be like, I freeze up.
Yeah, I love it. All right, we have a great episode. We have lots of questions that I think are going to be relevant to a lot of people. But one thing that we started doing is, listeners are listening to this right now, and they're thinking, like, what's in it for them? What are they going to get out of it? Take 30 seconds and tell the listeners that if they stick around and they give us 20, 40 minutes of their time, what are they going to get out of this at the end of the episode?
Well, I hope they get some insight into what teenagers today are facing, especially South Asian teenagers today are facing, because it's really different from what we all experienced when we were growing up. And then I also think they're going to come away with an understanding of what we, I think, as a community often miss in raising our children and having this hyper focus on academics. We're missing something really integral to their success. And, that's the thing I love talking about and sharing with people. So we'll definitely get to that.
Yeah. So I wanted to share with the listeners just a little bit more about you, other than the fact that you're a polyglot. That's the word, right? Polyglot? Where you speak multiple. Yeah. So you're a mom, which I want to celebrate first and foremost, simply because that's a unique skill set that, doesn't get celebrated enough. You're a wife, you're a Harvard grad, you have 2 PhDs, yes. But you're also president and COO of Signet Education, which focuses on helping teens and their families navigate college admissions process without losing themselves through it all. And you also have a podcast, your fellow podcaster. Your podcast is called Don't Force It, right? So we're basically going to be on here today on the Happy and Human podcast talking about why you shouldn't force it.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Welcome. We're so glad to have you. Tell us, give us a little bit of your sort of biography of how you got these 2 PhDs, your love of Persian poetry, and bring us back to what your current work is at Signet. And we have some really interesting questions about the college admission process what we can do to position our kids, and all the things that parents might be anxious about once their kids get into, like, you know ninth grade, 10th grade, because we're all thinking, right, just like our parents did, are our kids going to be okay by themselves? What can
Mhm.
we do to help them, right?
Right.
And I think that not only will we learn about what we can do for our kids, but a lot of those lessons will be applicable to us as well as
Yeah.
professionals and parents.
100%. So I'll try to tell you the short version of my story, and knowing the two of you and your audience, I think I can give you the shorthand and everyone will be like, oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. So my family is from Bangladesh. My father is a doctor. We grew up in a small town in Michigan, and I was, one of the onlys.
Mhm.
And my parents thought I should be a doctor, and had a hyper focus on academic excellence because that's the way you get to be a doctor. But I also think, and I talked to them about this recently, they didn't realize it, but I convinced them to look inward and reflect on what they were trying to do. And they're like, actually, you're right. But I think one of the other reasons they put such a focus on academic excellence and the specific career path was because they were experiencing what it was like to live and work in a place where they were different from every other person. And the fact that my dad was the doctor in this town afforded him a great deal of respect. And maybe protection is not the right word, but there was this sort of umbrella of protection around my mom and my brother and I as we, move through our lives in this small town looking completely different from everybody else. And I think for them, it was a matter of survival. Being the best student in your class, making sure your teachers knew who you were, being, some pillar of the community that the community really needs and can, show some deference to, was a way to make sure that we could make it in this country as immigrants or children of immigrants. So you all know that kind of story. I'm sure you experienced something very similar.
Yeah.
I went off to Harvard as a pre-med. And then in the middle of my time at Harvard, I finally started listening to that inner voice that was telling me, actually, you don't really want to be a doctor, certainly not as much as the other pre-meds who are here. And I had no way to figure out what I did want, but it was very easy for me to figure out what I didn't want. And I think that's still true of a lot of young people. It's a lot easier to say no or to complain instead of, put something out there that's positive.
Yeah.
But I kind of floundered. I didn't know what I was going to do. It happened to be a time where Wall Street was really booming and recruiting people left and right, and they didn't care whether you had ever studied economics. And so I ended up on Wall Street trading oil and gas derivatives.
Oh,
It
wow.
was glamorous. It paid very well. My parents, I think, understood that it was a position that people were competing for. And so in that way, they were like, okay, it must be a good thing for you to do, and you're not asking us for money, so that's cool. But they didn't really understand it, and truth be told, I didn't either. And pretty quickly I realized I didn't like the job. I didn't admire the people that I worked with. I couldn't see myself there for years and years, and so I quit. And again, didn't know how to figure out what I wanted. Floundered quite a bit. I thought I wanted to be an architect. I thought I wanted to go to film school. All of these crazy ideas were swirling in my mind. And I was doing things to try to figure those out, if those were the right fit for me, like internships here and there, talking to lots of people. But through all of that turmoil, the thing that I kept coming back to was this poetry. I had been introduced to this poetry when I was maybe 13 or 14. My family is Muslim with a Sufi orientation. So this kind of poetry showed up a lot. But this was also a time where Madonna had just discovered Rumi. And Coleman Barks was putting out these books and these wonderful versions of Rumi poems. And, I was a lost teenager, young adult, and those poems really spoke to me. And so I actually studied them in college, even while I was a pre-med, and learned Persian there. But while I was in this turmoil, when I was, 24, 25, my quarter life crisis, that poetry really helped me through a lot. And then I don't remember the moment, but there must have been a light bulb moment that said, oh, maybe I should go back and study this poetry. This is the thing that has stuck with me for almost 10 years now. Everything else I thought I liked, I don't like. So I went back and I did a master's. And I really threw myself into it. I thought I was a serious high school student, but I was not a serious student until I went back to grad school. I spent hours in the library, translating, reading, talking to other scholars. It was this very romanticized life of an academic. And I decided I wanted to become a professor. So I decided to do a PhD. And then while I was in the middle of that PhD, I realized I could add on another PhD because there are not a lot of colleges that have graduate programs in Persian literature. That's a fairly obscure topic, as you can imagine. But there are a lot of comparative literature programs, global literature programs, or world literature programs that would appreciate that kind of perspective. So I added on comparative literature, and, I really found my groove. I just loved talking about poetry. I was teaching in my graduate program, and then I had all these memories flood back to me of when I was in elementary school, and I would tell my parents I wanted to be a teacher. And of course their response was, you can't be a teacher. They don't respect teachers in America. You'll never have a nice car. You'll never have a nice home. You can't be a teacher. And we've worked through my resentment over that. But I felt these buckets being filled that I had forgotten were even things that were priorities to me at an earlier point in my life. And I just felt so fulfilled and felt like I was having an impact. And I was also doing something that I really loved. The thing that was missing was financial stability. Grad school does not pay, even though I had a really nice fellowship and I was living in Indiana, of all places, which is a very cheap place to live. So I started tutoring. And I'm one of those lucky few people who finds standardized testing very easy and a little bit fun. So I was tutoring the SAT and the ACT and the GRE and several other things, both privately and with other companies like, your Kaplans, things like that. And then I had moved back to Boston to write my dissertation on early modern love poetry in French, Arabic, Italian, English, German, Spanish. And I was using the Harvard libraries to do that. And my friend Jay had already founded Signet Education. And I was like, oh, I need a job. Let me hit Jay up so I can tutor. And, Jay and I were friends in college. We were not super close. But pretty immediately, we realized we saw the world very similarly. He had grown up in Florida, went to Harvard to study physics, and then had his kind of crisis moment and decided to study comparative religion. And then, finished college and opened a tutoring business. And both of our parents were like, what are you guys doing? Like, what is this? But, Jay and I really connected around certain values and certain things that we just had experienced and realized were important. A lot of which is being able to tune into what actually matters to you, what you're actually good at, and those sorts of things. So, yeah, I guess that brings us up to the present day. I mean, I joined Jay back in 2010, and I'm also the kind of person that can't see a problem and not try to solve it. So I just started solving problems in the business, and I was able to, leverage the experience I had on Wall Street, the experience I had on academia, the experience I had from other tutoring positions and companies. And Jay and I really reinvented Signet. And then in 2017, I became president and COO.
Congrats.
And that brings us up to today.
Wow.
Love it.
So
before we go into some substantive stuff, what is the Rumi poem that we all need in our lives?
Oh my gosh, there's so many of them.
I know, there are tons.
The one that I actually, Dinesh, you might appreciate this. I actually have this one tattooed. Is about the power of heartbreak. And I don't mean this in just a purely romantic way, but I think it's about, things not going the way you want, the sort of heartbreak of expectations. And I'm not going to quote the poem for you right now, but it's about the reason we love heartbreak is that there is this sweet, juicy kernel inside that seed, and we got to crack it open to get it. And that's why we are continually doing this to ourselves. That meaning comes from the pain.
Yeah. There's a lot of growth and beauty in the sadness and the heartbreak and the pivot, right? Back up.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So a lot of us have an inner dialogue, but recently I saw a stat that there are some people on the planet that don't have an inner dialogue. And that was surprising to me. But my inner dialogue is always talking. And it's like a board meeting in my head every day. And you talked about, listening to that inner voice and letting that voice guide you. And I know this is nuanced, and I know it's along a spectrum, and it really is something that everyone needs to sort of test and try out on their own. But maybe you have a way of thinking about it or a way of saying it that will resonate with some people, including myself. How do I know when to listen to the voice that says, eat the ice cream? Or listen to the voice that says, learn, I don't know, boxing, for example, or you should take your life in this direction, right? Or, I want to learn, be a really proficient surfer, right? But is that the voice I should listen to, or should I listen to the voice that says, you need to go to the gym today and you need to eat vegetables instead of chocolate?
Well, I love that you have this whole boardroom of voices in there.
Yeah, it's great. It's terrific.
I'm sure it makes for very restful sleep. I think the idea of an inner voice kind of confounded me a little bit as well. And I use the term inner voice because that's just what people call it. But for me, it's not a voice at all. And I really struggled when people would say, oh, that's the voice of your mother, or that's the voice of the judge, or that's the voice of whatever, right? And I was like, well, no, but it sounds like me. It's my voice. And then I realized that those voices are tricking us into thinking that it's ourselves. But they're probably from other places, other concerns, fears, other emotions. So it can be confusing, and there are way too many of them to listen to, and they're going to disguise themselves. The voice that tells you, yeah, surfing is your calling, go do it, is also going to tell you, eat the ice cream every day, which, maybe is good, but maybe in moderation is better. But what I've come to do, and this is something I really have to practice, is to get out of my head and get into my body. And I know that sounds really, really woo-woo, but
no, it's good.
Okay, you know what? I'm gonna actually hit the pause button here, not to pause recording, but really, I think that saying things like it's woo-woo is actually, you did not mean it disrespectfully. And when I've said it on this podcast, I've said the term woo-woo. But somebody told me the other day, and they were like, it's actually quite disrespectful because it's dismissive. Just because you don't understand it doesn't make it woo-woo, right? And so for those of you who are thinking about being in your body, or like when we talk about, I've said that on the podcast, the universe and this and that, if it's not something you understand, lean in, figure out why that's making you uncomfortable. So I'm going to hit unpause now. Sheila, go for it. And
I so appreciate that, because I'm going to go on a little academic aside here, right? And the thing for me is that we have been trained in our Western capitalist society, but also specifically in our immigrant American culture, to use our brains and not anything else. Our bodies are a problem. The color of our skin is a problem. Right? The food we like to eat is a problem, right? But our minds are not a problem. That's something that the Western capitalist can appreciate, because we are productive, hard workers, we are inventors and geniuses, and, all of the things, right? And this isn't to say, screw your brain. Our brains are very powerful, right? But it is a Western conception that our brain and our body are separate.
Right.
Right. And I blame Descartes. We can go back to the 1700s. I blame the Enlightenment. which itself is a, racist ideology.
Mm-hmm.
But let's put that aside, right? Yes, that is the world we live in right now, but we come from such a ancient culture of wisdom.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
We cannot ignore that as a source of strength for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so when I say, get into my body, it's not, I'm doing yoga I wish I was. I'm not doing yoga every day. I'm not meditating as much as I wish I were, but it's really tuning into what am I feeling in any given moment. And my body is always telling me things.
Yeah.
Right.
And that is yoga. That is like, it's not these formal, like, don't tell me it's going upside down, wearing cute yoga pants. Like, that's not yoga.
Yeah. Yoga is about connection.
Right.
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 And let's practice that connection between our mind and our body. I mean, let's not even pretend they're separate. They're not.
They're not separate.
And that is the thing that I think is our superpower that we are hiding, we are erasing, we are downplaying because we want to play this Western capitalist game.
Right. Well, it's rewarded us. Right?
It has. But here's the thing, and this applies to how I coach students through college admissions, right? And I'm not sitting there helping them meditate and, doing yoga or anything like that, but I am encouraging them to see that the strengths that they are born with are maybe not the things that are explicitly encouraged or rewarded, but they will get them to the top. Right. So when I guide students through college admissions, it's not, okay, how do you spend your time and how do you maximize this grade and how do you strategically present yourself to be this so that Harvard or Stanford accepts you? It's who are you really? What are your unique strengths? What are your unique values? And why does this college need you and your perspective? Right?
Wow.
It's about it's like a radical practice of self-love, self-acceptance to understand who you are and proceed from there. Now, okay, these are your strengths, these are your values. Let's push forward on those so that you're leading a meaningful life right now. You're taking advantage of all the opportunities right now, using everything that you have. And then that's just automatically going to help them stand out in the crowd of people who are just following a formula.
So what do the parents say to this? Because, that's like a really radical, I mean, first of all, just flipping the table, turning the tables and saying, why do you, Harvard, need me to be a part of, your organization or your institution? It's just, I'm so used to, fitting the mold and like, what do I need to do to quote unquote prove myself so I can get in and, get the aunties off my back. So what do you say to the parents who hear you say this and go, that's of course presuming that there are parents who are doing that. But
I mean, I'm sure that there are, and there are some audiences that light up when they hear me say that and are able to put down some burden.
Yeah.
Like, oh, thank God. There is another way to do this. There are some that are like, nope, that just falls on deaf ears. No way, this is not for me. And that's fine, because I think as important as it is for a student to choose a college that fits for them, if they're going to use, some outside help on this, there's got to be a really, really good fit there too, right? So if I'm not a fit for them, then that's great. I'm not going to try to convince you. I think it comes from an abundance mindset.
Yeah.
As opposed to a scarcity mindset, which is also quite radical in this day and age. It's very hard to hold that. But I also will say, I don't lead with that. I will tell a student that very directly. I will tell a parent, look, I've been doing this for 20 years. Here's where all of my students have gotten into and beyond where they have gotten into. This is what they say about how they've grown, how confident they feel, and how they know how to navigate what comes after college because of what work we did together, right? Yeah. Getting into college is just the beginning of the story, right? That's not the end of the journey. And if you think, if all of your parenting and coaching is just around getting in, well, then you're missing, you're missing the big picture. Yeah. Right. And I have the privilege of telling my families, well, even if they don't get into this college that has a 3% acceptance rate, because there is some amount of luck right? That has to come into play when we're looking at that kind of acceptance rate. They can feel like they used their high school years to their advantage. Right. I see so many students, and you hear about this in news articles too. Kids who did 15 APs and they spent every waking hour doing extracurriculars and volunteer work, maybe things that they were not particularly passionate about, but they felt they had to do them in order to be competitive for college admissions. And then they don't get into the school that they wanted to get into. And they look back and they say, well, what the heck did I do all that for? That was a waste. I could have slept. I could have had fun. I could have had a better relationship with my parents or a better relationship with my friends. I sold myself out for this thing that didn't even happen.
That happened. Like, that's something that I experienced. Like, I did not get in to the college I wanted to go to. And that was like heartbreaking.
It's devastating.
It's devastating. And because of that, like, my life is so beautiful. But you can't see that when, your life is, according to you, falling apart, and you're like, I have no way out of this now.
Yeah.
But it's and not to fault culture or parents, because we're all just trying to really truly do our best. It just, we aim so high to perform and achieve, and like, if we just have this formula that we follow that's guaranteed an outcome, why not?
Yeah. But as your experience attests, the formula is not guaranteed.
No, it's not.
Right?
No.
And literally, the more people that follow the formula, the less effective it becomes, because all the competition looks the same, right? But to your credit, Seema, you tried and you did all this work to get into this one college. You were devastated, but you had the personality and the mindset to turn that into a learning and growing experience. There are a lot of people that just don't get in, and then they fall into depression. They turn to drugs. They're, in some other way destructive to their future. Or they forge ahead at the school they didn't think they wanted to go to. They're bitter. They're not engaged. They're isolating from other people. And they do the same thing over again when then they're moving into the career phase, and they end up in a job that they don't love. It's like, why are we, let's just stop. Why are we doing this? We are alive to enjoy living. Right. And like, when we ignore that in the service of, well, I need a job that makes money, and I need to please my parents, and I need to look good in this circle or whatever. Of course, there are some basic necessities. Living is expensive, and I don't think it should be that way, but that is the reality. But when we alienate ourselves from our, true sources of meaning and our own values, it doesn't lead to good things, right? And there is research now that shows that kind of stress of like living out of alignment has real health impacts, has real impacts on your earning potential, and creates a cycle that you will then just pass down, to the next generation, And that is certainly what we do not want to see happen.
I use
over here.
no, it's great. All really good. I feel like I'm back in college and listening to a very esteemed professor. So keep going. I've got a page of notes already.
Oh, that's great. That's very nice of you.
So I use this analogy for my life and with other people. And let's say you had a brand new MacBook Pro, right? And it's got a camera and speakers and all the touch bar and all that stuff. And you load like Windows 3.1 on it, and you try to do a Zoom call. Good luck. Ain't happening, right? And so the issue is not that the technology doesn't exist or it's not capable of, is you've just got the wrong operating system. It's outdated. And a lot of times the operating system that we have as in our 40s, I don't know how old you are, but I'm in my mid 40s, was downloaded, not yesterday, was downloaded 20, 30 years ago when that operating system was current. So, DOS or Windows 3.1 was current in the 90s and it did its job then, but it's now become outdated. And if I am using that operating system today, obviously I won't be able to use the functionality of what's available, right? And so then you extrapolate that and you think about your kids or the next generation. And the operating system they have is currently being downloaded that suits me and serves me today in 2024 when ChatGPT is a brand new thing and Bitcoin is $64,000 or whatever it is, but is likely going to be outdated when they need to use it, right? For making money or things like that. Like I'm giving them principles of how to earn a living or how to live today that will be outdated later. And so one of the things that I've seen, especially with South Asians that follow this traditional path, which feels comfortable, like go to college, get a job, get married, have kids, pay taxes, save for retirement, and then live your life, is just a lack of personal awareness of what is possible in today's world, right? Like, how are people earning money? And look at the number of physicians and other professionals that are making 10x, 100x of doing something slightly different than what they trained in, right? I've got a friend, Vikram Raya, runs $1 billion real estate company that he started 5 years ago after being a cardiologist for 15 years, right? Ali Abdal in London is a YouTuber that makes about $7 million a year as opposed to working in the NIH, I think it is, in London, right? Or NIS, I can't remember. And so as parents, I wonder what you would say as we're trying to gear up our kids. What would you say about projecting our own lenses about what we think the path should be and how much of that falls upon us to maybe take a step back and say, okay, maybe things are different now. And what guidance would you give about accepting or making space for that kid's intuition or values that you would excavate?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I love that analogy of Windows 3.1 on a brand new MacBook. I
That's how old I am, by the way. I
well, I'm
remember
the same age,
loading
so it really
Windows
resonated.
3.1.
Yeah. So I mean, I think you're so right that parents, out of just human nature or fear or whatever it is they rely on, well, what worked for me will work for you. So
Yeah.
don't even worry about having new experiences or questioning, and just do what I did. Right.
Mhm.
And my family is maybe a good case study of that, because I have a brother who's 1 year older than me, and he did exactly what my parents wanted. My brother is the same subspecialty of radiology as my father. He even married a woman who studied chemical engineering, which was what my mother studied.
Wow.
Right?
The formula worked. The formula worked.
It would totally work for him. He has a beautiful house, 3 cars and a Porsche, 3 kids, and, they live in Ohio, and he's living a great life. And he does genuinely seem very, very happy. I knew growing up that blueprint was not going to work for me, but I also knew I could do it.
Mhm.
Right. I don't know why I thought that I could get into Harvard, but I was like, no, I can do that, as a naive teenager. And so I did it. We spend so much time, I think, playing the game, trying to win, that we don't stop to think, is that a prize I even want?
Right.
Is our ladder leaning against the right wall that we want to climb?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But to get back to your question there, I think it's so important for parents. I think this is the real work of parenting, is to check yourself when you're going into a situation with your kid, and it's so hard. But to check yourself, is this for me? Is this for them? Is this coming from a place of fear? Right? Because as parents, we just want the best for our kids. Right. And of course, we want to save them suffering or self-doubt. We want to save them from those things. But if we don't let them experience life for themselves, they will never know how to live it on their own.
Yeah.
Right. Especially when we're dealing with teenagers, we're enrolling them into their own adulthood. That's a phrase I love that I borrow from a parent coaching.
So good. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
This is the time where they are biologically, wired to start seeking independence. And their hormones are going crazy. They're in an academic environment where they have more independence than they've ever had before. And high school is very different. And they're about to embark on their own independent lives, right? Just in a few short years. So what better time is there to actually practice letting them make decisions for themselves and letting them make some mistakes? It's not going to ruin their lives. You're still there to help them and guide them, right? So our role as parents is to shift to more of a mentor, more of a coach than a coordinator, director, do what I say kind of thing. And what we try to do at Signet is not teach these kids, do this, do that, do that. It's let's help you learn how to make decisions for yourself based on your own values and your own strengths and the opportunities before you. And that is a flexible framework that, their values are going to change. Their strengths are going to change. Their interests are going to change, especially since, Seema, as you said, their brains are just mush. They're just still developing. Yeah. They're still figuring out the world. They haven't had much experience, right? But they need a framework that they can rely on to say, okay, I know how to look inward. I know how to seek good mentorship. I know how to put one foot in front of the other in whatever the situation is.
Yeah.
Wait. You've just blown my entire parenting philosophy up. It's totally backwards now. I thought parenting was all about reliving my childhood through my kids. So if I had to buy my shoes at Payless and I wanted Nikes back then, and now my son has Nikes, that's the way it should be. No, I'm kidding. But you mentioned something that really stuck with Seema and I right now is enrolling them in their own adulthood.
Yeah.
Right. What are some ways that you advocate for making adulthood attractive, to want them to enroll in it?
Yeah. That's a good question. No, I was just going to, because it's like, it's so easy if you don't watch yourself as a parent to just be this like curmudgeon, to use Dinesh's word that I've heard him use, is like, you're there and you're paying the bills and I have to go there and I got to do this and I'm mowing the lawn. Like, none of this is fun, right? Like the only thing fun that appears fun to them is, oh, you get to pick your own bedtime. And you can kind of, in their eyes, it's like you do whatever you want, but that's, there's so much belly aching that can potentially either be inferred or actually transferred, So yeah, just.
Well, I mean, this is bringing it full circle for me, Dinesh. In the intro, you were saying that, some of these things that I want to teach teenagers are going to be helpful for grownups too. This is one of those moments. Adulthood should be fun for us. And if it's not, then parent, you need to do some work and find those things that bring you joy, the hobbies that help you connect to other people. You've worked so hard to have a life, and it's not just to be a life of sacrifice to raise the next generation, though that's part of it. It's to have a life. Like, let's all have lives. And the best way to show kids that adulthood can be amazing, and if you work hard and you figure out, those things that bring you joy and you build a community for yourself, you can have this amazing life, is to actually have it, not just to talk about it. Right?
So good.
Yeah. I mean, I think
you want to say that all again? You want to say it all again? Because people these days are listening on 2 times speed, right? And
I'll say it.
That's going to sound like blah, 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 blah. No. We have to slow this down, right? I totally agree with you. I think doing interesting things, doing fun things, trying new things, showing your kids that you're malleable and you're moldable, right? I mean, I'll give you some simple examples. So I went to school in Florida. I moved to the United States when I was 12. I didn't really know about sports, and I got into Florida football because it was a big college school. But I wasn't a sports guy. I played basketball, but I didn't sit there and watch TV every Sunday in football, right? But my son is born here, and he's more exposed to the NFL, and we're totally in right now, right? And it's great. And we go to soccer games, we go to basketball games, and things like that. And I think that there is a lesson there to show our kids that dad can have fun too. Dad can learn new things. And selfishly, I see a thread to be able to connect to my kid that will last longer and will ensure that I have his ear for a sliver of the time relative to other people have, because there's a time is coming where other voices will be louder than mine.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And if I have, whether it's golf, alcohol, cigars, whatever I bond with him, video games, right, shoes, whatever it is we have in common, it behooves me to learn that and not say it's just what I'm stuck in my ways, right?
Yeah.
And you said it so well about have lives.
Yeah.
Do you see that? Do you feel that that is something that South Asian parents are maybe putting on the back burner, their own
Absolutely.
lives?
Absolutely. I mean, we all know what our parents were like.
Yeah.
And there are times where I am, sitting at this desk for 14 hours a day and I'm like, well, I just got to get this done. I got to get this done. And then I look up and my day is gone and I'm like, well, I am turning into my father. He was a workaholic. And he's retired now, and the poor man does not know what to do with himself when he doesn't have work.
Yeah.
And I don't want that to be me. And if for no other reason than that, I'm like, okay, I'm going to take a watercolor class. I know I'm going to be bad at it, but I just got to figure something out. And, to your point, Dinesh, it's a great opportunity to bond with your kids and make sure that relationship is there so that when they do have a challenge, a mistake, a problem they need your help with, they feel comfortable coming to you. Because when there's something, especially for young men, when there's something else that they can focus on, they're much more willing to talk.
Yeah.
If you just try to sit them down and say, I need to talk to you about your life, they're like, oh, the walls are up,
Yeah.
they're not there for it, right? But if you're doing something else, that's a really great way to do it. But the other thing I want to say about this is there are some things that cannot be taught, though they can be learned. I have a friend who is
lessons are not taught, they're caught.
Yeah. And I have a friend who's a resilience coach, and she taught me that resilience cannot be taught. You can't say, okay, you have to be resilient and this is how you do it. You have to demonstrate resilience. You have to talk about different ways that you're resilient. You have to talk about the resilience you see in other people in front of them, not to them, but around them. And then they will absorb those lessons, right? And they learn more from watching us and what we do than what we say.
Yeah.
Right. So if you want your kid to, embrace a happy, full life, you have to have a happy, full life.
Yeah.
And you have to decide what are your priorities and what are you modeling to your kids?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's so funny because that narrative starts when they're really young, right? Like when they're toddlers and they're in their high chair and we're teaching them how to eat and they're playing around and they're exploring, and understandably, right? Like you're trying to eat, you're hungry, maybe you've got other kids to feed, maybe you've got, maybe you still have work to do, whatever it may be. And I've said like, stop playing around. Let's eat, and only now when I reflect back, do I think, my gosh, now at least I know I need to go back and I want to try to unwire that and decode that a little bit. But it starts from then, right? Like not having fun, getting your work done. Life should be fun. If not, I try to avoid saying things like you're doing it wrong because everybody has their right way for them. And I'm not here to judge.
Well,
at least
one other thing that's coming up for me is that we can't pretend that this is just an individual issue for, you, Seema, to work against your wiring, to overcome what patterns your parents put in you, or for me or Dinesh to do that with our own families. This is a systemic issue.
Yeah.
And it's not just because the culture we were raised in. It's also because of the society we live in. And I know one of the reasons I end up losing my temper with my son when he's not putting his shoes on and we need to get out the door is because I'm in a rush. Yeah. Right. I really internalized time is money. I got to get to this thing. I have to go, do X, Y, and Z to make sure we, can live in this house that we have. And so you have to do your part. But I think internalized capitalism is a real thing. And I also think that we are living in a society that does not take care of families.
Absolutely.
And I don't know how much longer this can go on like this, but I also know that if we think of these as individual challenges, we don't share them with each other. We don't come together to actually demand change. And the cycle continues. Right. So I like to say we've got to put down these individual burdens. And it doesn't mean ignore the problem, but it means don't feel guilty that this is your problem alone to solve. You can solve this in community.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think from what I understand, Signet provides, that's part of what they provide, is that sense of community. In terms of, there's some reassurance in saying like, oh, I have a bunch of really successful people, successful by traditional standards, but also successful in the way that, that je ne sais quoi, I don't know, like something else, right? You're truly happy and you're truly living life to the fullest. That's where I want to go, because they've done something differently in the formula to get there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And we talked about this in the pre-show a little bit, but, is college for everyone?
It's a good question. I think that is a very legitimate question, especially now facing changes in the workplace and changes in technology. I think more and more companies are reevaluating whether they need to require college degrees for their roles. I think there are probably some institutions that will never change, because it was about creating a class of society more than it was about getting the right person for the job, right? There are certain things that probably won't change, or it'll take a very long time to change. But I was just reading a headline today that college presidents are very aware that the perceived value of college is going down, both because the actual price of college is going up, and then, it's hard for people to find jobs and the debt is so expensive, and because colleges are not doing a ton to prepare students for this new world of work, for the future of work that we're seeing. There's some colleges that are doing a great job at this. I actually think community colleges are doing a better job at this than the sort of traditional four-year colleges, because they just have a lot more flexibility. But I think that's a real question. I think every family should grapple with that question individually for each individual child, because it's going to be different, right? And it totally depends on what your goals are. I know my plumber, for example, we just had to have all the pipes replaced in our, historically protected house. My plumber makes good money, and he's part of a union, and he's going to have a pension, and he didn't go to college. He did some vocational training, and, is also a really great person who I think brings his values into his work. He's going to be very successful. I have no doubt that he is going to increase the generational wealth in his family line. And so college is not necessary, right? And he's living a great life.
Yeah. So I love your answer. I totally agree with it. I interpreted your answer to answer the question, is a college degree for everyone, right? There's another side of college, which is the experience, which is moving away from home, the opportunity to be one of 40,000 or one of 4,000, whatever it is, an opportunity to try things and sort of find your bearings. Can you talk a little bit about that part of college? Is that dispensable by becoming a plumber or whatever it is? Like, there's no judgment here. But if we don't need college degrees, are we creating another harm by taking away that socialized institutional
that
experience of growth from the house to adulthood?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question, especially in the context of South Asian families.
And remote work and things like that too, right?
Absolutely. Well, I think that is a valuable experience, but the reason I was thinking about South Asian families is, as you all know, the system in India and in many other countries outside the US is just different. You have to know what your career is going to be before you even apply. There's no go to college and find yourself. Right. And you can't switch your track. You have to start all over if you want to change from one thing to another. Where in America, it's like, oh, college is kind of this fun time where you get to explore different topics and learn who you are and get socialized and all of these things. That's not the purpose of university in a lot of other places. It is in America. And so I think especially if our parents were immigrants or they were educated somewhere else, that's not something they're expecting from US college. Right.
Yeah.
But I think it is such an important thing to keep in mind, because high school life in America does not give you that, unless maybe your kid went to a boarding school.
Right.
And that kind of learning about yourself and learning about your place in the world is just so valuable. I think is one of the reasons I try to do that with teenagers before they leave for college, so that they can take advantage of that opportunity. So yeah, I mean, I think you raise a good question. I don't know what replaces it if people stop going to college. But this is I think a uniquely modern problem, because that kind of experience you called it an institutional experience used to come from things like religious groups.
Yeah.
Or, the Elk Lodge, or, things like that. And we just don't have those. I mean, they exist, but they're not as popular as they used to be. So we're missing out on something there. And I think it's also, a symptom of late stage capitalism, that people are individuals first, not members of the community.
Yeah.
And that community membership, I think, is so important and so missing, particularly, as I've said before, in our community. We might go to temple, or we might go to the mosque, but our kids are not feeling connected to each other. Right. So yeah, it's a good question. I don't think I have a good answer for what replaces that, because I think it is important.
Yeah. It's funny when, Nilu, when she was on the podcast, we talked a little bit about this that you just touched on, which was this I versus the we. Is culturally, we're a very we-based society. And then the needs of the individual get squashed. And then here we are in America, where it's, seemingly dog eat dog, right? And, layering those two things, one on top of another, is a challenge, especially as things evolve so quickly. There's careers out there now that didn't exist 5 years ago. The idea that you can literally create from nothing and make billions of dollars, and have an incredible life, that wasn't validated until recently, right? You see more and more of this. And so I just feel like you mentioned the word tension before we hit record, right? There's some real tension here going back and forth between, this is what worked for me, this is what worked for my grandparents. And where do I, as a teenager, fit in, because I'm hearing about how college is so expensive and my parents don't know how they're going to pay for it, or, why am I being forced to pick something like a college major at age 18 when I have really no real grasp or real world experience on what it means to be a mechanical engineer or an architect or an interventional radiologist, right? Where do the chips fall there?
Yes, great point. And I think it's really important to realize that the world has changed radically, even in the last 5 years, right? So we don't know what's going to happen, right? And that uncertainty is very difficult, not just for parents, but for the teenagers themselves. And we know uncertainty is the biggest cause of, anxiety and all of these things. And that's where resilience comes in. Right. Yeah. Knowing that you can handle hard things, that you have handled hard things, is one way to kind of get through it. There was something else I was going to say. I'm sure it'll pop up. You have a follow up. Go ahead, ask.
Well, so my follow up to that was more, we have created this economy in America where the whole college prep industry, it's a whole industry, right? And then when Felicity Huffman and all of that went down, and
oh my God, yeah.
I'm looking at my friends who have kids that are transitioning to high school, and they're spending money on tutors and prep courses. And I, as a mother of a middle schooler, sometimes find myself kind of in this oh my gosh, FOMO, I'm missing out. What do I need to know? Scarcity mindset.
Yeah.
What can we do as parents? Where would we be well advised to spend our resources, time, money, effort, outside of just building a meaningful, trusting relationship with our children, of course. But as far as college prep goes and exploring whether college is an option, finding the college that works for us, accepting, there's so many different ways to proceed.
Yeah.
Where should we be spending our time and energy?
Well, I think it's really important to have good information about what matters in the college process, right? If you think college is a goal for you or your kids, then you actually need to know what matters. And it's fairly simple. Actually, your listeners can Google factors in college admission, NACAC, NACAC. That's the National Association of College Admissions Counselors. Almost every four-year university in the country is a member of that institution. They get surveyed every year. What are the most important factors that you look at? And the top three are grades. There's your grades in your most advanced classes. There's your overall GPA, so how you do in all of your classes. And then it's the rigor of your curriculum. How hard were the classes you took, right? So those are clearly the most important things. After that, they say it's positive character attributes. And that's a new one that just showed up last year. But that shows up in their extracurriculars, in the teacher recommendations, in the way they treat their peers and the way they show up in the world generally, right? Community engagement, volunteer work, things like that. So if you feel you need to spend money to supercharge something, those are the things to look at, right? But if your kid is, loves school and does really well, then you don't need to put extra tutors in the mix. You don't need to pay for test prep if they're a natural test taker. So, you've got to do a little diagnosis to see, all right, what's really their appetite for this and what's really their capacity. There are some things I think are absolutely worth investing in. I mean, my kid is only 6 and he goes to a math class every week, and he is ahead of his class, and that's not why we're doing it. I just think that those skills are really important to learn at a foundational level, and I want him to have that. But I think that if you start to pay for expensive club sports, enrichment activities, and even mentors like me, right, a college admissions consultant, you need to make sure it fits with what your kid needs and what their own goals are for their life. And they may not understand this whole process yet, but just throwing money at the problem is not necessarily going to help them. Right. So we really kind of need to understand, well, what are we solving for? You may have great advising in your high school and you don't need supplemental help. Or your kid may have a learning challenge and they're going to need a little more attention on those essays than their high school can give them, or they're going to move through this process on a different timeline in a different way. Maybe then you want somebody who can help you with that. Right. But not everybody needs this sort of thing. And there are places that you can go to get good free information. That's one of our missions actually at Signet. We have a really robust blog. I do free webinars all the time. I do open office hours every 2 weeks. I share a lot on my LinkedIn. That's how you found me, Seema. And I have a free parent community that has like recordings of all of this stuff, and you can always message me. We're also piloting a couple of courses that are super cheap, just to get that information out there, because I know this is such a source of stress for parents, and not everybody can afford one-on-one services with somebody like me, and I really just want to make it accessible.
It's about us building community, serving the community, because one size does not fit all.
Yeah.
You talked about maybe about 5 minutes ago, you talked about the world is changing so rapidly, right? And it's so different than it was 5 years ago. I think an important thing to realize as well is that the rate of change is speeding up. Right. And so the delta between 5 years ago is not going to take 5 years to materialize. It might be here in 2.5 years or 2 years or things like that. And it behooves us to think of that, of what we want to do, where we want to end up in those terms, rather than in the same terms that took us from where we were to where we are today, right? Things are just going to come a lot faster. Things will happen at a different rate than they've been happening, and we need to prepare our kids and ourselves for that.
Yeah, that's so true. I think every time I turn around, there's some new app, or there's some new this, or there's some new that.
Right.
I mean, I feel like my son comes home every other day with some new word that, I'm like, what is this? Is even English? And so I think that's really important to kind of highlight is it's changing. Yes, it's changing. We all know that. We know it's changing fast. And the delta is getting, just condensed and condensed and condensed.
Yeah. And with that realization, I think it's so important to think about, well, what do we want to stay the same? And why do we want it to stay the same? What do we want to change? And can we, like, the rate at which society is changing, that rapid rate, that rapidly accelerating rate, should give us permission to change things in our lives. Right.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't just have to be this new technology is there and then all of these changes happen. It's like, well, everything's changing. Why not change it all up? Right. Or what is important to you to keep the same? Right.
Yeah.
I think that there's so much permission that comes in witnessing that.
Really, truly. I mean, I never thought I would have said out loud to myself or to anybody is, it no longer matters to me whether or not my child goes to college. I used to think of course. And is that something that I want for them? Yes. Partly because it's familiar, partly because there's experiences in college that you don't really get anywhere else. And there's certain careers that college degree is required. And at the same time, I think it's so important to highlight the fact that there are so many more options here. What we want is for them to be so truly kind, so truly empathetic, so truly collaborative, happy human, abundance mindset. I don't know the answer, but I'll figure it out. We want that. And
I remember the thing I wanted to say to you earlier where, kids might be looking at the cost of college and being like, oh, this isn't worth it. Why do I have to do this really expensive thing? And yes, one of the decisions might be, should I go to college or should I not go to college? But I think one of the things that particularly in South Asian communities in general, that we get so hung up on is we have to go to a top 50 college. We have to go to this ranked college. Now, rankings are completely made up. There's a lot of really good writing on this. You can look it up, but those rankings mean nothing. But we're so hung up on the brand name of the college that we think those are the options. Either they go to, a top 50 college, or they don't go to college at all. But there are literally thousands of colleges in the United States, all sizes, all manner of instruction, some of which are really doing progressive things. And if you can just open your mind a little bit to think, okay, maybe they go to college, but it's not a college I've ever heard of or my aunties have ever heard of.
Yeah.
But it's the right fit for my kid and it's going to launch them into a successful next phase of their life. We have to be open to that too, right? It's not, a binary choice. There's just so many options out there. And, the acceptance rate at, these top 200 colleges is quite low and getting lower all the time because more and more people are just applying to those. But the average acceptance rate of the over 4,000 four-year universities in the United States is something like 80%.
Oh, wow.
There's a place for everybody.
Yeah.
Right. But if we concentrate on just these few brand names we've heard about or we see in the media all the time, that's where we run into problems.
Yeah. And not just in the United States. I mean, college outside of the United States or higher education outside of the United States. I know a lot of people in my college went to med school in the islands, right? And now they're top of their profession and they're extremely successful. And it really means nothing at the end of the day. And if I'm a testament of whether good grades or where you went to college means anything, we know that's the false.
Right. Yeah.
So good, Sheila. You are a wealth of knowledge and you have shared so many pearls of wisdom. Usually on the social medias, we'll put little excerpts and I think we've got like a dozen excerpts.
Yeah.
So,
good.
It's been so good. Share with us one thing that our listeners can either implement for themselves or with their families that we can do today and that beyond a shadow of a doubt will change our lives in short order.
I love this question. The answer for me is very easy. It's integrate reflection into your daily life. Find some moment, maybe it's when you first wake up or right before you go to bed, to reflect on what went well, what didn't go well, what would you do differently, or what can I be grateful for, right? Who's a person who needs me to reach out to them? Find some time to just get yourself out of the weeds and reflect on your day. And I think this is so valuable for parents with their kids. I know I do it with my son before bedtime. What's our favorite part of the day? Everybody in the room says their favorite part of the day, and helps us go to bed with a smile on our faces. And it's building that muscle for reflection. Eventually he's going to need to reflect on more complicated things than just what was my best part of the day. Right. But that is something that will absolutely change your life.
I love that.
So good.
Yeah.
I believe that, because not only does it do all the things you say, but it gets you out from a reactionary perspective to more a thoughtful, deliberative. And, my wife, probably about 10 days ago, started doing hippo when we're doing dinner. You guys know what I'm talking about? Have you heard this hippo thing before? Now, we go around the table and we all talk about our high, our low of the day, and then something surprised you, like a hippo coming out of the water, right? And it really is a mechanism to just pump the brakes, instead of your mind just running from one thing to another thing to another thing that is, sort of the urgent but not important, the squares, the Eisenhower matrix. Otherwise, I find that we're always thinking about the next urgent thing. That's not necessarily in the important part. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, so important. In my family, we do date, and we've kind of fallen off of this now. Which is kind of my reminder to get back on it with the kids. But date is something that is like discover, achieve, thankful, and something you experienced. And it can be as big or as little. Like you can discover like, I didn't have what I needed this morning, or, something that you actually learned, you're achieved, you're thankful. And the experience could be something as simple as like, I experienced holding my breath, or I experienced, being scared because I didn't know the answer in class, but it's that framework actually has created so much. Sheila, you talked about having that trust with our kids when making these decisions about college and what's right for them and what their goals are and what would make them really happy. And I love that this is a great way, hippo or reflect or date, whatever you want to call it. It plants these seeds of continual conversation so that you are building that trust. And so one fine day when they do need to look for an unknown or an answer, they can either source themselves based on the thousands of conversations you've had before, or they at least have the trust to know to come and find you. So such a powerful tool.
Yeah.
So we have also on Happy and Human, Ask It Forward. So at the end of the show, listeners, if you aren't familiar, we ask a question of our guest and the question is left by the guest previous to them. So the guest that asked this question did not know who they would be asking this question for. And so Sheila, this question is from Philip Nathram. And he said, he wants to, his question was more, write a eulogy for yourself, or say a eulogy for yourself. What would people say about you when your time on this planet is finished?
This is a great question. We actually ask it when we are coaching parents. Imagine it's your funeral. What do you want people to say in your eulogy? I have never done the exercise on myself. So let's see what comes out here. I really hope that people will say, I had an impact on their lives. I think impact is so important to me. A positive impact, hopefully, not a negative. That I had a positive impact on their lives, or their children's lives.
Now it's your turn. We don't know who's going to be the next guest on the Happy and Human podcast, but ask a question forward. What would you like to ask?
Yeah, somebody asked me this one recently, and it yielded so many great answers. What's a crucible moment that you experience? And that a crucible moment is like a really difficult period of time, but it actually crystallized you into something really strong.
Ooh, so good.
Do you want to answer that since you're here?
Yeah, for me, it was
for yourself.
It was that period of time when I had left my job on Wall Street and I was trying to figure out what to do next. I felt so lost. I felt like such a failure. And I turned to this poetry because it would be a source of comfort. And Seema, I think you said this when we first talked. These spiritual traditions that we come from always tell us to look inwards, to listen to that higher voice, to trust your gut.
Mhm.
And this poetry helped me do that. And it helped me take what I thought was just a hobby and turn it into something really, life defining. And it led me on the rest of my journey.
Yeah. Oh man.
Really good.
So rich. I'm so glad I found you on LinkedIn. Guys, I'm not on LinkedIn too much, but I think you commented on somebody else's post or something. And I was like, oh, just something about your face and your name, like something, my intuition said, check this person out. And my mind was just blown. I was like, I just have to meet you like now. And I'm so glad that social media facilitated that conversation. And now we're text buddies, which is really cool. So thank you so much for being on the show and stuff. It's been incredible. I know a lot of people are going to get a ton of value out of it.
The podcast is such a big influence in our lives, and we learn so much from our guests that come on, and it's not lost on us that you take time out of your time to spend time with us and share from your life perspectives. But we also want the podcast to make an impact in the lives of people that haven't heard of the podcast or don't listen to it. And one of the ways we thought of doing that is to ask each guest to share an organization or a cause that's near and dear to their hearts so that we can raise awareness of various organizations or things, because our guests really are from the full tapestry of the world and all around the world, so that we can make a small contribution on behalf of you. One, to acknowledge your time and show our appreciation, but also not only raise awareness, but to help make an impact in the causes that really matter to our guests. So is there a cause or organization that you can tell us about, share with us why it's important, and then we can make a contribution to?
I love this tradition. There are so many. But the one that I think I would highlight is
just one. We're not monetized.
Yes.
We are no sponsors. So just one, please.
So the one that I think I would highlight is called Class Action. And I can send you the link later. They are a nonprofit. It was started by a professor and another academic who are trying to do two things. One is end legacy preferences in college admission, because that is a source of, a huge lack of diversity, and it needs to go. Absolutely. And then the second thing they're trying to do is end career funneling, which is that thing that happened to me where when I decided I wasn't going to be a pre-med, there was this whole apparatus at Harvard calling me in to financial services. And, there are all these brilliant minds, kids who want to do good things in the world, who just get funneled into these careers where they make rich people richer, instead of actually doing the good in the world that they wanted to do. And I think that this is a really important thing to draw attention to, because it happens to so many kids. And in a way, it's what's happening to our South Asian kids. They're being career funneled before they even have a choice. So I really like that organization.
Yeah. I've never heard of that. We're really looking forward to supporting them. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
So where can our audience find you? What's coming up for you? What are you excited about?
So my LinkedIn is probably the easiest place. I do respond to LinkedIn messages, as you know, Seema.
Yes, you do.
You can find me on my LinkedIn. My company's website is signeteducation.com, and you can schedule a call right from the website as well. I also have a free parent community called How to Get into College. Pretty sure Google we'll bring that up. It's also linked on my LinkedIn. So those are probably the three best ways to learn from me and get in contact.
I love that. Sheila, thank you so much for your time. We're so thrilled that you have been able to come on the show. And I know our listeners are going to benefit.
Well, this is such a fun conversation. I really appreciate it.